All right, to keep this show on the road, on we go to story number 2. I'm sure that you have all heard, at least at one time or another, of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is an organization purportedly established to track hate groups in the United States. Kind of keep track of them, let them know like how society is quote unquote, evolving away from hate or how we're regressing, etc., etc. Now, the funny thing about it is that the Southern Poverty Law Center itself is a hate group. Back in almost 2 years, well, going on 2 years ago now, in August this year, it will have been 2 years, Jessica Prohl-Smith, an opinion contributor to USA Today, wrote an opinion piece, the headline of which read thus: "The Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate-based scam that nearly caused me to be murdered." I mean, we heard about, or we saw actually, members of Congress turn the floor of our supposed temple of democracy into a group therapy session, when even people who weren't in the Capitol on January 6th said that they had post-traumatic stress disorder or something similar to that, knowing that they could have been, oh my gosh, actually put into harm's way. Well, back in 2012, cast your mind back to 2012, August 15th of 2012. And do you remember in Washington, D.C., when the Family Research Council, a public advocacy organization that promoted principles of protecting the family, promoting the dignity of every human life, and advocating for religious liberty, when it was attacked by a gunman? This is actually, this actually happened. I mean, I know that it was 9 years ago, but a young man on a mission to kill Jessica Prohl-Smith, person writing this opinion piece in USA Today in 2019, a young man on a mission to kill me and as many of my colleagues as possible. This was the guy who had the Chick-fil-A sandwiches. Remember that? He was going to kill as many people in the Family Research Council as he could and then smear their faces with Chick-fil-A sandwiches. Because at the time, the Caffey family who owned Chick-fil-A had said that they still believed in the biblical definition of marriage. And so, of course, Chick-fil-A was a hate organization as well. Now, Jessica Prohl-Smith, later in this piece, says that the reason why the shooter targeted the Family Research Center of the Family Research Council is because the Southern Poverty Law Center had designated them a hate group. They had designated them a hate group because they stood for, the historical, and we should say philosophically sound definition of marriage, because they stood for life. They fought against, they fought for pro-life laws. They fought for, like she said, the dignity of every person, born and unborn, because they fought for religious liberty. Because of that, the Southern Poverty Law Center actually designated them a hate group, which is what caused that guy, the shooter, potential shooter, well, actually, no, he was shooting people. It provoked the shooter, or that was the straw that broke the camel's back, which encouraged the shooter to actually go out and kill as many of those people as possible, because he thought that they were the equivalent of the Nazis. Funny how dehumanization works. It's almost as if when you label an organization that you may disagree with, but which isn't being hateful whatsoever, but is simply advocating for its principles that 100 years ago would have seemed to everyone just to be common sense. When you designate them a hate group, when you say that the people who work for those or sorts of organizations are hateful, bigoted, horrible, fascist people who would sooner squish you like a bug if you don't concur with their beliefs, then look at you. It's amazing when that sort of dehumanization takes place, what it actually brings about. People actually invading, wanting to shoot as many people as possible. Well, That is the Southern Poverty Law Center. This week, it came out that the Southern Poverty Law Center has decided, in its infinite wisdom, to paraphrase Orwell, not from 1984, but Animal Farm, that all hate is equal, but some hate, gosh darn it, some hate is just more equal than others. Or, I guess to make it a bit more accurate of a situation, all hate is bad, but some hate is worse than others. This is the headline. Now, to be clear, this piece, published by the Southern Poverty Law Center, okay, this is not, a take from the Daily Wire or the Blaze or Fox News. This is actually from the Southern Poverty Law Center itself. I will post a link to this piece in the description box. So if you want to actually look at it yourself, read it with your own eyes, you can do that. Please, by all means, do so, because I want you to see just how far down the rabbit hole into the red trial we are. Last week I talked about the red trial from Alice in Wonderland and how that's a pretty good analogy of where we are today. This piece came out on October 8th last year, October 8th of 2020, but it was just, I believe, this past week that people finally started to actually notice what was happening. And someone wrote a big piece in Front Page magazine about it, which is really what got this ball rolling. And all of a sudden, because, some of these things, the Southern Poverty Law Center publishes this on their website, but unless you explore their website intimately every day, it's very easy to miss it. So, this is the headline, published October 8th, 2020, but only publicly recognized, I might say, or only made publicly aware this past week. Headline, Equity Through Accuracy, Changes to Our Hate Map. In pursuit of a more accurate and more just hate map, the Intelligence Project has committed to collapsing the Black separatist listing. We will still monitor these groups, but we will be transferring them to hate ideologies, including anti-Semitism, that better describe the harm their rhetoric inflicts. So, what they're saying, before, in the past, the Southern Poverty Law Center would list these supposed hate groups, and I say supposed, because not all of these groups were hateful. The Southern Poverty Law Center, part of the scam that Jessica Prohl-Smith hinted at in her USA Today opinion piece, was that the Southern Poverty Law Center would take actual hate groups like the Ku Klux Klan, but then they would list other groups alongside the KKK or underneath the KKK. So, for example, I believe one year they even listed the Knights of Columbus as a hate group. The Catholic fraternity group was a hate group because it said, I believe that it was standing up for the biblical definition of marriage too, saying, hey, you know what, we're a Catholic organization, so we kind of, agree with the Catholic Church's definition of marriage. Shocking, I know. But that was part of the scam. You saw all of these organizations listed, alongside groups like the KKK, the American Nazi Party, which unfortunately is actually a real thing. And so, by association, you thought, well, all of these groups must be, just as horrible as these other groups. So, they would list these groups by, I guess, their main sins. So, whether they were anti-LGBTQIA2+, whether they were anti-Semitic, what have you, white nationalist. And so they had another category for Black separatists. These are people, Black organizations like Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam. Surprise, surprise. I told you in the last video that we would be seeing Louis again here this week, which actually I think is the only 2 times that he's come up in the whole history of the Rolling Stones. So good for you, Farrakhan. You've made the cut. You are now honored forever amongst the stars. Got to make it sound grandiose, right, gang? So anyway, to get back to serious things, they had listings of actual black separatist groups, like the Nation of Islam, which has actually said that black people in the United States basically need to form their own country. The other organization, what was it called? The Not Giving an F Anymore group. The Black Militant group that came up alongside BLM this past year. I believe it's, what was he called? It's Grand Master. Said in all seriousness that black Americans should be given the state of Texas. All white people, maybe all Hispanic people too, just need to get out of Texas, and all black Americans can move down to Texas and they can make it some sort of black union state or whatever. So groups like that were listed in their own separate category. Now what the Southern Poverty Law Center is saying is that they're not going to be listed as black separatist groups. They're still going to be technically listed, but they're only going to be listed under, oh, this group is anti-Semitic. Oh, this group is anti-LGBTQIA2+. You're not going to know automatically by the name that it is a black separatist group. So, in a sense, they're still monitoring these groups, but on the other way, they're doing it in such a way so that the general public will not know that these are actually predominantly black groups and that they are black separatist movements who have a hatred, you know, for anyone who isn't black. These people are, let me just say it, these people in these black separatist groups are racist. If you say that you need your own separate country, simply because you're black and because, you know, white people are evil, Asian people are evil, Hispanic people are evil, and therefore black people cannot trust these other ethnic groups, then you're a racist. Just as much as an antebellum plantation owner in 1850 was a racist. That's just the way that it works. Sorry if, you know, I have shattered your delusions. Now, the reason you have to go down in this piece to actually get to the juicy part of this story, which comes in 2 paragraphs. Quote, "The black separatist listing created a color line bias, separating hate and extremism by race and granting the appearance of a false equivalency of equal hate on both sides. But the hate is not equal. Black separatism was born out of valid anger against very real historical and systematic oppression. Black people in the U.S. have rarely experienced having a power structure that represents them. However, white nationalism has held historical, systematic, and institutional power for hundreds of years in this country. Black separatism is a response to white supremacy and white nationalism. It has not, however, received the same mainstream attention as white nationalism, nor do black separatists have the overwhelming share of racially motivated violence attributed to their overall goals of separation. Yes, some black nationalists have committed violence against Jewish communities, but those are fueled by anti-Semitism, not separatism. Additionally, black separatism is rooted in valid concerns about how federal and state institutions treat black people." Unquote. There you go. There you have it, right from the horse's mouth. Not all hate is equal. The hate is not equal. So, in other words, you can be a black person, you can be a black individual, and you can hate white people with a passion. But you're not as bad as a white person, or an Asian person, or a Hispanic person who hates black people. This is how far down the rabbit hole that we've actually gone, gang. Where we are now an actual, and oftentimes, lauded institution by the left is now saying that not all hate is equal. And also, here is the thing. Here's the real key takeaway. because some people might be saying, well, it's just the Southern Poverty Law Center. And isn't the Southern Poverty Law Center in a bunch of trouble? I mean, didn't it just have to pay, millions and millions of dollars to settle a lawsuit? And gosh, even some people on the left don't exactly like it. There were some exposés written in the Washington Post in the 90s, and then some others, I think, in New York Magazine. True, gang. Absolutely true. However, let me read you this headline again. Equity through accuracy. Big red flag should be coming up in your minds right away upon hearing the word equity. Equity is this critical theory concept which says that material goods and institutional power, just power and influence in society, needs to be redivided. It needs to be divided so that marginalized groups, quote unquote, can actually become, quote unquote, equal. See there? See what's happening? It's not about equality. It's about equity. It's a Marxist redistribution of goods and influence in order to supposedly make up for wrongs that either actually did happen or which only happen in the minds of ideologues. The two get conflated every now and then. Most of the time, actually. And this equity, because it is part of the parlance of critical theory, which the postmodern American left has swallowed hook, line, and sinker, means that, on principle, a leftist would have to agree with the Southern Poverty Law Center. It would have to agree with its reasoning, and it would have to agree with its conclusion, because otherwise, to deny that the Southern Poverty Law Center did anything good, to actually oppose the Southern Poverty Law Center and the stunt it pulled here, would be to actually be opposing equity, which means, of course, that you would be turning your back on critical theory, which means, of course, that you are nothing more than a white supremacist and a white oppressor against all the minorities who have been nothing but oppressed in this country from day one per the left. So, by the logic that the left has woven for itself, and which it has been running with now for the past several years, if not decades, it's now just coming into the mainstream now. A leftist has to agree with this. It has to agree with this, or else risk not being a member in good standing of the Church of Woke. So it's not just the Southern Poverty Law Center, it is the entire left which actually agrees with this. And the danger problem, the huge problem with that, is that you can't have a society like this, gang. You can't. It's impossible. When you actually reach a point where you're saying that some types of hate are socially justifiable, that it's okay for these ethnic groups to hate these ethnic groups, then you are, oh my gosh, I mean, you are actually setting up exactly what Gina Carino said. You are setting up a new persecution of people who don't belong to the privileged ethnic or social groups. It's amazing. It is amazing. Sometimes the coincidences that happen, that this story should happen the same week that Gina Carino got fired from Lucasfilms for simply saying that, hey, you know what the Nazis did to Jews? We're kind of heading down that way too now because we're dehumanizing people for their political beliefs. Well, now we're dehumanizing people for their racial identities, for their race, not just their racial identities. That was kind of a stupid thing to say, but for their race, for their ethnicity. We are now saying, the left is now saying that it is perfectly all right to hate certain people because of their skin color. We are back. We have been pulled back. The side which bleated incessantly that this wasn't the 1950s anymore, when anyone even remotely said that, hey, you know what? Maybe sex isn't a toy. Maybe sex isn't just there to satisfy whatever desires you have, no matter how mainstream or how perverted they are. That same group, which kept saying that it's not the 1950s, it's not the 1950s, has dragged us back to the 1840s in terms of race relations, because now we have a fully implemented racialized hierarchy where if you belong to the right ethnic group, you can hate other ethnic groups, and nobody will say anything at all. And yeah, maybe you'll get your wrist slapped if you do something like commit an act of anti-Semitism. I don't know what that means. What? Do you have to pelt the local synagogue with eggs? Do you have to knock down the rabbi and smear bacon on him or something? I don't know. What it would take for actually someone like the Southern Poverty Law Center to say, oh, now, that was a little too far. That was naughty. Please don't do that again. But other than that, you're justified in your hate. And you can't run a society on that. You can't run a society on a racialized hierarchy anyway. That didn't work out the last time it was tried in our history. But now the left is trying to do it again in order to rectify history. Problem is, you can't rectify history. The past is past. You can only learn from history so that you don't make the same mistakes again. But because of the poison of critical theory, the left is ignoring that. They know that that's true, but they are deciding to ignore that for their own racialized utopia. And also so that there's also, I mean, of course, the personal concern here that I'm sure these people at the Southern Poverty Law Center are doing this to defend their own hide, because they said this decision comes after many internal and external conversations. Yeah, that means they see which way the wind is blowing. They know where power is located now, and it's in the mob. And therefore, they're doing this to cover their own backsides. That is also an element here, gang. And I will repeat again. You can't have a society like this. You either are going to have a tyrannical society, or a society is going to revolt in order to get rid of the system that is being put in place. There's no third way out of it, because something like this can't be reasoned, negotiated, or rationalized with, or bribed away into oblivion. It can't. You either accept it or you fight it. That is story number 2.